You know what? Nobody wants to admit this, but the person holding you back today probably isn't your boss. It's not your spouse. It's not your past. It's not your circumstances. It's the identity that you've chosen to believe about yourself. Every decision you make starts with one question that you rarely ask. Who do I believe that I am? If your identity is built on who you used to be instead of who you're becoming, you're going to keep repeating yesterday, even while hoping for a different tomorrow. What I want to talk about in this session is the difference between your perceived identity and your ideal identity, and why closing the gap between the two may be the most important transformation that you're ever going to make. So you've probably noticed that two people can experience the exact same setback, yet one uses it as fuel while the other one lets it define the rest of their life. And the difference usually isn't in talent. It's not on how smart they are. It's not on luck. It's all around identity. One of the biggest discoveries in psychology is that people don't simply behave based on facts. They believe based on who they believe that they are. Your identity becomes the operating system that runs quietly in the background of every single decision that you make. Whether you realize it or not, you're constantly asking yourself, is this something someone like me would do? So we're going to start out with what I call perceived identity. And this is the identity that is built by looking backward. It's shaped by your history, who you used to be, what people said about you, the mistakes that you've made, the labels that you've accepted, and even how you currently feel about yourself. And if you failed recently, you may be thinking things like, I'm a failure. If you have struggled in a relationship, you may start believing, hey, I'm hard to love. If you've battled anxiety, depression, addiction, setbacks, you may quietly tell yourself, hey, this is just who I am. And over time, what happens is that those beliefs become your self-esteem, not because they're true, but because you've repeated them so often that they feel untrue. Then something else can quietly enter the picture, and that's gratification. We start chasing what makes us feel better in the moment instead of becoming someone better over time. We scroll social media instead of reflecting. We binge watch TV shows instead of building. We avoid those difficult conversations. We procrastinate on things that matter most. Not because we're lazy, but because we've perceived identity, or our perceived identity, is trying to protect itself from discomfort. I see this all the time when I'm coaching veterans, I'm coaching people who've been diagnosed with PTS. Many leave the military with incredible leadership, discipline, resilience, problem-solving skills, yet after taking off the uniform, they begin introducing themselves with one simple phrase, I used to. I used to lead people. Maybe in the back of their mind, I used to have purpose. I used to matter. Maybe they identify with what their rank was or what their job was. And without realizing it, they're allowing their history to define their future. And the same thing happens after a divorce, a breakup, a retirement, losing a business, receiving a really difficult medical diagnosis, or even becoming an empty nester. Because life changes, but identity often doesn't follow it. Now compare that with your ideal identity. This identity doesn't ignore your past. It simply refuses to let your past make today's decisions. Instead, it asks different questions. What's my vision for my life? Who could I become? What do I want to be? Who should I be? How do I continue to grow? How do I continue to mature? I want you to notice the difference. You see, perceived identity asks, who was I? Ideal identity asks, who am I becoming? One is focused on the rearview mirror, and the other one is focused up here on the windshield. Psychology has been studying this for decades. Research on self-concept, self-schema, identity-based behavior, they consistently show that lasting change begins with changing how we see ourselves. Our identity acts like a filter. It influences what opportunities we notice, what risk we're willing to take, how we interpret setbacks, and if we persist when things start to get really difficult. James Clear popularized this idea in Atomic Habits when he wrote that every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. That's why goals alone rarely create lasting transformation. You see, if I believe that I'm unhealthy, I'll eventually return back to unhealthy habits. If I believe I'm financially irresponsible, I'll eventually sabotage my own financial success. If I believe that I'm not worthy of love, I'll often push healthy relationships away. Behavior naturally tries to stay consistent with identity. And honestly, that's why when I coach people, it's not just about setting goals and doing homework assignments. It's about helping someone examine the story that they're living from. Because if your identity says, I'm just not confident, no amount of motivation is going to create lasting confidence. But when you begin asking yourself, what would a confident person do in this situation? Everything starts to shift. You stop waiting to feel different. You begin acting differently. And honestly, over time, your confidence catches up with your actions. Here's a simple exercise I would encourage you to try. Take out a piece of paper, open up your journal, and draw a line right down the middle of it. On the left-hand side, write perceived identity and list every belief that you've been carrying about yourself. Things like, I'm getting too old, I can't teach old dog new tricks, maybe it's different, maybe you're too young, I don't have the training, I'm not disciplined, I'm not lucky, I'm not smart enough, I'm not a leader, I always quit, I work out of fear. Now don't judge the list. Just, you want to get it out on paper. Again, a journal is a great thing to use for this, but just get it out there on paper. Now on the right-hand side, write ideal identity and ask yourself these questions. Who do I want to become? What values guide that person? How does that person handle, things like adversity? How are they resilient? How do they care for their health? How do they treat the people that they love? Maybe even, since we were talking about habits earlier, what habits do they practice every single day? And then I want you to ask one final question. What's one thing that version of you would do today? Not next year, not when life settles down, not when things get easy, but today. Because transformation never happens all at once. It happens one decision at a time. It happens one conversation at a time. It happens one workout at a time. Even if you're just driving out there and parking and going to the parking lot of the gym, that begins to build a habit. One healthy meal, one courageous choice, one promise that you keep to yourself. Eventually, those small decisions become habits, and those habits shape your character. And one day you're going to realize something truly incredible. You're no longer trying to become that person, because you already are that person. It's just that you've been living from an identity that no longer serves you. Hey, I would love to be a partner on this journey with you. My coaching, it's not about giving you advice or telling you what to do. It's about partnering with you to uncover the beliefs that you've been holding, that are actually holding you back, and clarify truly who you want to become and create intentional actions that move you towards that future. If you're ready to close the gap between perceived identity and your ideal identity, just set up a coaching call. Because your history may explain where you've been, but your identity is going to determine where